Okay, in this video we're going to go ahead and continue with the process of creating the materials and the shaders to go ahead and apply it to this scene so that stuff renders out and looks good. So let's go ahead and do that. Next, what we're going to do is create a material for this little teapot. So let's go ahead and open up the material manager. Control 7 again to do that. Okay, here's our ceramic tiles material. Let's create a new material. But what I'm going to do, so I don't have to set this up and take forever doing it, I'm just going to right click and duplicate this ceramic tiles material and just rename it. And I'm going to call this one Fine China Matte. Okay, this is going to be the fine china material. And what I want to do is, let me select the teapot here, right click and assign the fine china material to the teapot. So now the teapot has its own architectural material, which you can see in the render region. Okay, great. Now next thing to do is to edit the material to get it the way to look for making some nice fine china or ceramics or whatnot. Okay, so let's change the color to pure white. We'll leave the weight at 1 and roughness at 0. We don't want this object to look rough at all because it's supposed to be fine china. And for transparency and reflection and all this, what we're going to do is I'm going to change the index of refraction to 1.7 because that looks more interesting. And the reflectivity, I want this thing to be completely reflective. So I'm going to increase the reflection all the way to 1, so it's 100% reflective. The glossiness, I don't want this to be glossy at all, so I'm going to increase that glossiness to 1. That way it doesn't have any glossiness, essentially, if that makes any sense. Also, I don't want it to be a metal type material, so I'll turn that off. And for the BSRDF, what I want is for the perpendicular reflectivity to be 1, and I want the facing reflectivity to be as little as only 0.1. So I want it to reflect more in the edges than here. Now, another key thing here that I'm going to show you is, let me go ahead and do a quick little render region here. Okay, so there's our little pot here. All right. Now, I don't want this conserve energy turned on. Now, what is this for? This option is enabled by default. What it does, it follows the laws of energy conservation in order to make sure that this material is physically accurate. Now, you can have it on or you can turn it off. Watch what happens when I turn it off. The teapot becomes a little bit brighter. That's because it's no longer conserving energy. But the edges get this nice kind of rim highlight, which I really like. So this is more of an artistic call on your part. If you like the way it looks with energy conservation on, or maybe you're thinking, you know what, it looks realistic enough, I'm not going to stick to realism too much, I want it to look like this, that's the case. In my case, I really like the way that this looks, so I'm going to keep it this way. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, I'm going to leave ambient occlusion off. I'm going to go to optimization. And over here we have reflection interpolation enabled. I don't want that enabled for this teapot. I want the reflections to look nicer. So I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so now the reflections look a little bit clearer and a little bit nicer actually. Okay, so I like the way that that looks. So now we have that teapot that's got that nice ceramic type look to it. Fine china. Hopefully it's a little bit close to the edge of that table there. I hope it doesn't fall and break, although it would look pretty cool if it did. Okay, next, if you notice, the floor is not looking too great, obviously. So what we want to do is create a nice floor material. So let's take the fine china material, because all the objects in the scene, most of the objects in the scene are using architectural materials. So let's duplicate the fine china material. Okay, let's rename it. We're going to call it floor matte. And now we need to change these settings around so that it looks different because right now it's just a duplicate of the fine china, and obviously we don't want that. So for the diffuse, let's leave it at a red value of 1. For the G or the green, let's put that at 0.9, and then for the blue, let's put that at 0.8. So we get kind of like this salmon peach color. Actually, let me increase that a little bit so it doesn't look so peachy. Looks more desaturated. Looks better. Now in terms of weight, I'm going to put the weight at 0.5, and that's going to darken it up. And the roughness, I want the floor to look a little bit rough because people walk on it, people step on it. So even if it is a nice, clean architectural scene, it should have a little bit of roughness for the sake of realism. Okay? Now let's go over here to transparency and reflection. Obviously the floor is not going to be transparent. We're not standing on glass or anything unless you want to. I'm going to change the index of refraction back to 1.4. The reflectivity, I don't want it to be so reflective, so I'm going to put it at 0.6. So it is a shiny, reflective kind of floor, but not totally reflective, just a bit. I'm not going to make it a metallic material. And for the BRDF, I'm going to turn this facing reflectivity back to 0.2. Okay, and I'm going to tell this shader to conserve energy because I don't want it to be blown out and super bright. So let's go over here to ambient occlusion, and I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion. Now the max distance I'm going to set to 300, and we're going to a really high value so that we can really see the effect of this take place. And in fact, let me turn off ambient occlusion real quick. I want to do some render regions here so you can see what's going on with the floor. Oh, obviously you're not going to see what's going on unless we apply the material to the floor. So let's select the floor here and right click the floor material, assign to selection. Okay, so there's the floor. We do a render region. That's what the floor looks like. Okay, now over here it's kind of brightly lit. I really don't want that too much. So I'm going to go over here, open up the shader for the floor. Go back to ambient occlusion. I'm going to enable ambient occlusion. So that's what we get. So let's turn this up to a value of 300. And that's going to darken it up real good. Let's take this ambient color and knock it all the way up to pure white. That helps to make the effect a little bit more evident. So let's do render region maybe in this corner over here, and it's a little bit difficult to see. It's a very subtle effect. You can see here in the corner if I turn the ambient occlusion off, it is a little bit hard to see. I guess it's going to be easier to see the effect once we have the walls set up as well, but there's actually a little bit of darkening that's occurring right along here in the edges of the wall. And let's turn the sampling up to 32. That way we don't get too much graininess in there. And the render times are not really increased much by increasing the sampling here, as opposed to just using the ambient occlusion node by itself, which is always a good thing. Anytime you can cut rendering times down, it's like having your cake and eating it too. Let's go to optimization. And in optimization, I want to use interpolation for reflections. So I'm going to turn on enable for reflections. Samples of 2 is pretty good. I also want to turn on distance. I'm going to keep it at 0. And then what I'm going to do is give the reflections on the floor a fall off. So down here in the reflections, I'm going to turn on enable for the fall off. And for distance, as you can see, if we do some maybe a render preview here, there's the floor. It's not reflecting much because the distance right now is set to 20. So let's increase that to something as high as 150 so the reflections can reach farther. So now we can see the reflections of the window just barely getting in there because of the distance parameter. So that looks pretty good. So the floor starts to look better, and it looks kind of glossy so that it doesn't look too clean. Okay, so that's going to do it for optimization. As far as additional options goes, I'm really not going to change anything in additional options. Those defaults perfectly fine. Okay, let's set up another material. How about a nice glass material? Let's go ahead and set up a nice glass material. Let me take, say, I'm just going to take, say, this fine china, and yeah, I'll duplicate the fine china. Change the material name, obviously. Let's change it to glass mat. Okay, now what we want to do is apply the glass material to objects that are going to use it. And an object that is going to use the glass material is going to be the glass vase here, or vase, however you would like to say it. And let's go ahead and click and drag that on top of the vase or the vase. Okay, let's do a quick render region here. And there it is. It has the material applied to it. What we want to do is go to this glass material, open up its PPG here. I'm going to pin it down by clicking that little keyhole icon there so it doesn't go anywhere. And now we have to adjust the settings of this glass material so it looks more like glass. So what I want to do is under illumination, let's see, we're going to change, actually we're not going to change anything. This is perfectly fine. I want the weight to be 1, no roughness, and the diffuse to be pure white. Okay, so let's move over to transparency and reflection. I want it to be completely transparent. So if we do a render region here, see it's completely transparent. Obviously this doesn't look too good. We're going to be fixing that in a moment. In terms of glossiness, I'll leave that stuff alone. Index of refraction I'm going to put at 1.6. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leave glossiness alone. I'm not going to turn on metal material. I am going to activate this default index of refraction for the BRDF. Okay, let's go to ambient occlusion, make sure that's off. I'm going to go to optimization, and let me see, none of this stuff is on. Okay, I'm going to make sure that energy conservation is turned on. Yeah, that's what was killing me there. Want to make sure that conserve energy is turned on, especially if you're doing glass. I'm going to turn on default IOF, or index of refraction. That way the reflections and the transparency is controlled. The way that it bends light waves as they go through the object are going to be controlled by the index of refraction here, which is right now set to 1.6. So now we have this this glassy vase or vase material set up, which looks pretty good. Looks pretty realistic. Okay, so now we have that set up. Let's go ahead and set up a few more materials here. Obviously, we're going to need material for, say, our wine glass is going to need a material, of course. Okay, so let's set up a wine glass material. I'm going to take the glass material, and since it's the closest one to looking like the wine glass, I'm going to duplicate it. Now you're probably wondering, why not just use the glass material for the wine glass? Well, because then I'd really be cutting corners, and I really don't want to do that to you. I'm going to set up a different glass material with a few different settings just so it looks different. Okay, so I'm going to call this wine glass matte. Okay, now for the color, I'm going to go for mid-gray. And for the weight, I'm going to leave that alone. Transparency and reflection. I want the transparency to be completely 100% transparency. You have to be able to see through this. I'm going to change the index of refraction, vary things up a bit, put it to 1.5 so it doesn't look exactly like the vase. Reflectivity, I'm going to put to 0.6. Don't want it to be too reflective, just to make it look different. Down here, I'm going to leave it at default IOF. I think it's probably going to be the best way to go. No ambient occlusion. In terms of optimization, I'm not really going to turn on any of the optimization parameters. I want this to look more realistic, so I don't want to optimize it too much. Okay, select the wine glass, right click on the wine glass material, assign to selection. Let's do a render region, see how that looks. Okay, not bad. Good. Now let's set up a few more materials here. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I think this video's been running long enough. I'm going to stop this video here, and in the next one we'll finish up and place the last materials in the scene.